Now, earlier tonight, I talked with our legal analyst and the host of CT21, Eric Parker. I started by asking him for his thoughts on the verdict.
I think it was a pretty quick deliberation. I think that's the biggest risk. Anyone who's covered a trial knows 10 hours is not a substantial deliberation for these type of charges. So I think the biggest reaction from any court watcher would be that it went quick.
It's interesting. A lot of people have described it tonight as really a turning point when it comes to law enforcement being put on trial. Do you see this as a major shift?
I think it's pretty rare, especially here in Connecticut, for sure. A prosecution of a police officer is pretty rare, but anywhere around the country, you see that a prosecution, but certainly a conviction of a police officer for on-duty actions is rare, really, really rare. So to have not just the prosecution, such high profile, but also the conviction. And many people are saying that it might be a shift, that there may be a different level of accountability moving forward for some of these police officers. Obviously, it's still going to be case by case with what happens. But I think that's the big takeaway here, is that this is so rare. It was so high profile, and then a relatively quick conviction.
Rare, of course. But Eric, you yourself covered a case, several years ago, right, of a police officer who had been charged?
Yeah, Robert Lawler, a Hartford police officer, he was charged in the shooting death of Chauvin. He was acquitted after a long and contentious trial back in 2009. I was in the courtroom for most of that trial, there with the victim's family as well as Mr. Lawler's family. It was a very closely watched case in Connecticut. In our state, there are investigations anytime there's a police use of force, but to bring criminal charges for on-duty actions was exceedingly rare in Connecticut. It's one of the only cases we know of. And of course, it did end in an acquittal, saying that he was justified in thinking that this young man was reaching for a gun. That was the jury's conclusion. And there was subsequent litigation about whether those charges were even fair in the first place. But that was 2009. And that was really the big case in Connecticut that had charges, that Robert Lawler case. And it was the top story on the news for weeks.
What do you anticipate happening now, across the country and, of course, here in Connecticut? Will there be some fallout from this verdict today?
Well, obviously, Connecticut just passed this police accountability law, which very much changes the role, the relationship between police and suspects and victims and how they're accountable for their actions. There's an inspector general position being created in Connecticut. So there's already been a sea change, I think, maybe in reaction to Floyd and some of the other cases that were covered around the country. Now that we see the jury coming in, I mean, this is the American system. The jury of your peers comes forward and says your actions weren't within the law. And I think that adds a different level to it beyond just legislators. You get legislators, that's something where they can feel the pulse, take the temperature of the society, maybe make a change to the law. But to actually have the citizens step into that jury box, listen to the testimony, and stand up and say guilty, that's a different type of message. And I think a lot of people will be watching it pretty closely.